Liberal bias, by definition, is the partisan selection or distortion of information to support liberal policies. Media in the United States has had a liberal bias since the printing press was invented and since mass media became a part of our culture. Printed media is not the only venue for liberal bias, though. It could be expressed by professors, by public school teachers, and by journalists from any source of information. There are also several different forms of bias. These include bias by commission, by omission, by story selection, by placement, selection of sources, spin, labeling, recommendation, and condemnation. I'm not going to be able to talk about every form of bias today, but I am going to touch on a few of them. The first one I'm going to talk about is bias by commission. This is the most common form of liberal media bias today. This is when reporters present only one perspective or the facts from liberals without acknowledging that conservatives disagree. An example of this is when the networks blamed the Republicans for the government shutdown. In mainstream media, there were 41 different stories that blamed the GOP for the government shutdown, and not one single story blaming the Democrats. You also didn't hear in mainstream media from the Republicans about how the administration was trying to make the shutdown as painful as possible by shutting down operations that actually didn't cost that much to run in the first place. These included websites, parking lots, and open-air memorials. Another example of this was in 1993 when a CBS reporter claimed that in 1989, after nearly a decade of federal cutbacks for immunizations, the previously successful measles vaccination program broke down. If you really look into it, the Centers for Disease Control revealed that spending actually rose from $32 million in 1980 to $186 million in 1990. This happens because reporters often refer to cuts when in all actuality the program was never cut. All that happened was the rate of increase was reduced. The next form of bias I'm going to talk about is bias by omission. This is when the reporter completely ignores facts that disprove liberal beliefs or that support conservative beliefs. An example of this is when the networks failed to air Obama's refusal to call Benghazi a terrorist attack. CBS deliberately left out a portion of the 60-minute interview with President Obama where he was directly questioned about his inability to call Benghazi an act of terrorism. This interview was very conveniently edited and aired during the election time. When the news did finally break about Benghazi being an act of terrorism, neither President Obama's nor Hillary Clinton's names were ever mentioned. Another example of this is when the New York Times military death inventory, which was updated daily while President Bush was in office, came to an abrupt stop when Obama decided that we needed a troop surge in Afghanistan. The military victims from Obama's Afghan war are actually missing from the faces of the dead section in the Times, which was also updated daily under Bush. During the 7 years and 4 months before Obama's 8-month surge, 7 deaths per month were reported. During that 8 months, that number jumped all the way up to 39 deaths per month. The last form of bias I'm going to talk about is liberal bias by labeling. This can actually happen in a few different ways. The reporters can attach a label to conservatives and not to liberals. They could attach a more extreme label to conservatives than to liberals. or they could actually use a label with a person or a group that would attach a strong emotion such as fear, hate, or loathing. An example of this would be when presidential candidates are labeled in an attempt to sway voters. Philip Rucker wrote an article in the Washington Post that described Mitt Romney as a New Englander in a party rooted in the South, a man of moderate temperament in a party fueled by hot rhetoric, a Mormon in a party guided by Christians, and a flip-flopper in a party that demands ideological purity. These are just a few examples of liberal bias in media today. After hearing them, I hope that you would agree with me that our country's media has a very strong liberal bias, and we need to be better informed with unbiased coverage. Our country could possibly be in a different position right now if we had truly unbiased media coverage.